Welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy, and today I am extremely thrilled and excited to be joined by Mary Gordon, who is the founder and president of the Roots of Empathy program. Hi Mary, how are you?
Hi, how are you, Jane? I'm grand this morning, thank you.
That's super. So Mary, before we get into what exactly Roots of Empathy is, maybe you can tell me a bit about yourself, your personal background and perhaps a bit about your career path, please.
Sure. Well, I have Irish roots. Let me start right there.
Nice one.
Many generations ago, 5 or 6, my family came from Ireland, and I grew up in Newfoundland. And there was a very big influence of place in my life. And I guess my home was a multi-generational home where we had both sets of grandparents and a very busy family, lots of children. And I really think my life influences came from the kitchen tables,
Okay.
and more than from my university training or my teaching experience. So in my home, I was exposed to informally what our responsibilities are to those less fortunate in the world. And never that I thought of it that way, but, just to give maybe a little example and then move along, my mother, who was an artist who stopped working when the children were born, went back to it afterwards, but she always had a very practical bent in that she set up this group of women who would make clothes and organize food, and she would be the one to deliver the food and the clothing and the coal. And she would bring one of the children along with her and do it after school. So we had very humbling experiences of being brought into a home where there was abject poverty. I mean, we weren't rich, we were just very middle class.
Mm-hmm.
My dad gave away whatever money we had, as it turns out, but he gave it to the third world. We never had party shoes because some little girl in India didn't have any.
Okay.
So we lived modestly is what I'm saying, but the humility and the respect for people living in struggle was there without it ever being named. And, the understanding of mental health issues and poverty issues. There was one man, St. John's was the city I grew up in, although we lived out around the bay, usually in the summer times. But there was one man who they called him Silly Willie. And every community had a poor Silly Willie who was clearly developmentally delayed. And when we were making sandwiches to go on a little picnic to a park or something, there was always a sandwich made for Silly Willie that we would just drive and drop off and say, how are you today? Have you got a drink? What you want, some juice or something like that. So all of these little things that connected us to our shared humanity had a profound effect on my life. Everybody who got out of jail in St. John's, their first meal was an invitation to my house.
Wow.
So my mother would set up the card table in the hall. And, we didn't have big criminals. Probably they stole something small, or typically they were arrested for being drunk and disorderly.
Okay.
They weren't threatening people, but all to say, we always had the sense that they're but for fortune.
Yeah.
And we were exactly the same, just our opportunities and experiences were different. So I think that influenced my life. So I started out then as a kindergarten teacher because I always believed that if you had the chance to work with the youngest children, you have the best hope for helping them enjoy their life and contribute to the world. So, but I realized in very short order that with those little children who are 4 and 5 years of age, it was too late for some of them.
Gosh.
That whatever the experiences were at home, that they were disabling their full participation, that they were overwhelmed with shyness and anxiety, or they were unteachable with aggression, etc. So I learned from those families the challenges of living with domestic violence. I learned about the challenges of poverty as a young adult. So from that, I decided, okay, my best impact would be to help families with their little children before they came to school, because the families who were newcomers and living in poverty or living in violence, those children didn't have the same opportunities that most families had, that somebody had the time to read to them, to talk and listen with them, that somebody played with them. So these centers that I set up in Toronto, as it turns out, became public policy because they worked so well in raising levels of literacy. If parents and their preschool children came together to make friends and learn from one another, and to basically learn what is a sort of a normal development for children, how can you work with that, rather than my mom always did it this way and I'm going to swat you because my mom swatted you, and no pain, no gain was one of the mantras. So that really influenced me, and it was from that work that I really realized the power of the attachment relationship, because I worked with a great deal of domestic violence in those centers. They were in the most impoverished and violent schools that we had. And, you know, in helping particularly one group of very young mothers that I worked with, they were 13 to 18. What I learned was that they were generationally repeating the violence and poor parenting that they experienced. So for me, it was a huge wake-up thing that this violence is generational. And also I learned that what the underscoring or the common denominator in all that violence was the absence of empathy. And I think empathy was what I grew up with, although I didn't see it at the minute. But empathy very much was the core of my upbringing. So I think the two realizations, that the absence of empathy or underscored violence, but the loving relationship between a parent or parents and a baby is where empathy grows, that we all are biologically disposed, inherently disposed to be empathic, but it's in the context of that first loving relationship that empathy fades or flowers. So that's it.
Thank you, Mary. That's really fascinating there, because I don't think the public have any clue about that. I think there's a concept that either you're born with empathy somehow or you're not. And of course, Bruce Perry and Maya Salvitz wrote a great book called Born for Love, why empathy is, what's it called again? I've forgotten it now. Endangered, so important and endangered, or something like that. But regardless, anyway, I heard about your program Roots of Empathy from that book. And one of the things that struck me in it was that a lot of the foundations, as you say, for empathy are laid down in the first year of life, rather frighteningly, in the sense that we don't know what goes on in that first year of life so often. It's behind closed doors. Many people are struggling. Some people have postnatal depression. They're unable to be attuned, maybe because of domestic violence or all these other adverse childhood experiences and factors. But can you tell me, Mary, what is the mission then and the vision of Roots of Empathy?
Well, I guess the mission of Roots of Empathy is to really change the world child by child by raising levels of empathy in children and adults. And we're trying to break intergenerational cycles of violence and poor parenting. So this vision of changing the world child by child, you know, we've been at this 24 years. We've reached more than 1 million children. We're on 4 continents. I really feel that it's not just the children who experience the program, because we'll never reach all the children. But when you reach one child, you reach the child's family, the neighborhood, and the teachers who host the program. We bring in our own instructor. They see what happens, and they bring that on with all their other grades that they have. So our mission is and our vision, they're big ideas, but we're really coming to see how the world has changed from when I started this. People and Bruce Perry, he called me when he was writing his book, and he said, in the United States, when he was writing his book, if empathy was in the title, it would be a non-seller.
Isn't that shocking?
shocking, but I mean, he was absolutely right.
Yeah.
He totally values empathy and see where its relational gold is, but he's practical. He wants to help people if his book doesn't get out to people. So in the subtitle, Why Empathy is Important and Endangered,
Yeah.
was the way that he was able to get around it. But you're so right. You know, that first year of life is private.
Yeah.
And we have to hold the family in the palm of our hands. And there are many wonderful things that are happening in Ireland, there in the UK, and many places that are beginning to do that. But I think there is no age at which it's too old to develop empathy.
And that's so important, because obviously you're working with kids who are already at school and who may not have had that great start in the first year of life and may have had challenges in subsequent years. But what do they see in engaging with, you bring a little baby into the classroom? Maybe tell me a little bit about how does the program actually work? Because I know my own daughter Aurora would adore it. She loves babies and would be cooing and oohing and eyeing and so curious. But let's say for a child who is growing up with domestic violence and maybe a drug addicted or mentally unwell parent and a lot of chaos in the community, or maybe dealing with racism, what can they learn from these interactions with the baby as they grow?
Well, just really briefly to tell you, we find an infant between 2 to 4 months of age in the fall, and a parent who's in a happy, well-attached relationship with that baby. We look for the baby in the community of the school, because overnight that parent becomes a rock star.
Yeah.
And we want to show that, because the children all fall in love with the baby. And I have to say, the vulnerable children that you mentioned, they fall in love with the mommy as well. Now,
Okay.
we always, I mean, it's easier just the way society is organized to get mommies, but we love it when we get a daddy, and any
Sure.
constellation of the family works. We're not, all we care about is love.
Okay.
But they have to be the ones who give their life up for that baby. So this little baby comes to school with an instructor we've trained from the community, and the instructor has a curriculum, and we divide it into 4 age groups so that everything we're doing with that class of children is relevant to their own school curriculum and is relevant to their developmental age. So over the school year, we visit the classroom 27 times, you know, for about 30 to 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And there's a lesson plan. I'm an old school mom, right? You don't get past that. But the thing is, I really believe that instructional time is precious. And that to have the privilege, we're probably one of the few programs in the world that works in the classroom during instructional time at the invitation of the teacher, right? Because it allows the teacher to see her children or his children in a unique way, where our agenda isn't what you know, it's what you feel and what you think. And there's no wrong answers. And so the program works through with this little baby, following the baby's milestones, their physical, their emotional, their cognitive milestones. The children learn to take the perspective of this tiny baby. They sit around a green blanket, the mommy and the baby are in one part with the instructor. The teacher is part of this, but the poor weary teacher, the lovely thing, teachers are my heroes, by the way.
Sure.
The teacher becomes part of the program in that they join their class. And when do you ever get to join your class?
Yeah.
You know, and they help out, they, you know, with anything that's going on, but they don't deliver the program. They're part of it, and that's powerful. So the children are coached to observe how the baby is feeling. So we live in an emotionally illiterate society. These children who grow up with roots of empathy can talk about how they feel. And they encourage others to talk about how they feel. So they learn the words that the baby might experience, like frustration. They learn the understanding for loneliness. And they learn important things like babies don't just cry because of physical problems like being cold, tired, wet, or hungry, in pain. They cry validly for emotional reasons. And that right there will stop child abuse in many instances. And we've been funded for that, because society doesn't realize that babies will cry because they're confused or lonely or scared or many other reasons. Anyhow, the children find the humanity in the baby, and the trick is, I shouldn't really call it a trick, but the mechanism, if you like.
The magic.
The magic. Anything that happens on the green blanket is flipped back to the children's experience. So that little baby, that family, they only come over the school year 9 times. But the week before they come and the week after, we have curriculum that helps with prediction and with reflection. Okay. So we're working on all kinds of things that will help the vulnerable children that you're talking about. Executive function skills are never taught discreetly. In Roots of Empathy, we teach children about perspective taking, the cognitive side of empathy. How do you do that with a baby? And they do it very easily with a baby. So then the trick is, how do we sort of take the perspective of the other in the classroom? And the affective part of empathy, which is emotion, they're learning the vocabulary for their feelings. And they're getting direct experiences through activities before and after of being able to talk about their feelings. And this is not social work. We're not fixing anything. Children are not telling us their problems, but the beautiful thing is they're sharing with one another a time that they felt sad, or they're sharing with one another a time that they felt very embarrassed, so that the children are learning that they're not alone in their negative feelings, that we all feel sad and mad and happy and frustrated all the time. So what we know is that the children in the development of empathy, they learn to connect to others, to have relationships with others. And, you know, for the classroom teacher to see this happening is brilliant, because it allows the teacher to get closer to the children in ways that you're so busy otherwise you wouldn't have the opportunity. And you can't teach children until you can reach children. And this helps the teacher reach children. So apart from learning a lot of things, the children have a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, I'm sure, because I've seen some of the videos, you know, and it's just absolutely gorgeous, and the curiosity. And when babies smile at you or scrunch up their faces or whatever, it's impossible not to respond over time. You know, you'd want a very hard heart indeed. But what I like about it as well there, as you say, is that we don't, in the traditional curriculum, I think in most countries in the world, focus enough on emotions. And the fact that if we're emotionally unsafe, or we don't even know what we're feeling in our body, or that there's a word for it, or we try and suppress the nasty and the ugly feelings, you know, the anger, the rage, and the sadness or jealousy, instead of understanding that they are common, they're normal, and they have a function to kind of protect us or alert us. And so just spending time talking about them from the baby's perspective first, and then reflecting how they feel themselves among their peers, does that then help with things like pro-social behavior and dealing with maybe conflict among the peers, or aggression, or not following the teacher's instructions and that type of thing, Mary?
Yes, it's so interesting to see that as empathy goes up, so does calmness in the classroom. And what goes down is the aggression and the bullying and the violence, really. And when you speak about pro-social behavior, that is one of the most encouraging findings. You know, some people call it social emotional competence. One of the children said to me many years ago, well, Roots of Empathy is really about just teaching you how to be a good guy.
Nice.
And we don't teach them anything. It's almost like a Socratic method. We don't tell the children, we only ask questions. That's all we do. And the thing is, the questions probe more questions, so that we're pulling it from the children because they all have it in them. And yes, absolutely, you can make friends when you're able to connect to somebody else and understand how they're feeling. And I mean, we see lovely things happening. And I'm just reminded of the one thing related to your question. I was in a classroom, East Coast of Canada, and this little boy came in, and the Roots of Empathy family visit was in progress. It had just started, and he sort of burst through the door, had red hair. He looked sort of angry. And one other little boy in the class, and these children, I suppose they were 8 or 9 years old, one other little boy in the class went over to him and he put his arm around him. He said, "Billy boy, I can see you're cruising for a bruising." So I don't know what TV show he'd been watching, but what that brilliant little boy did, what a friend.
Yeah.
He knew that kid was going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And he tried to prevent him from getting in trouble.
Yeah.
And that's what we see in Roots of Empathy classes, that the children help one another. So rather than being taught to compete with one another, we help children learn how to befriend one another and to collaborate with one another and to see one another as equals. And that this whole idea of, you were mentioning conflict resolution and conflict, the very first stage of any conflict resolution is the ability to take the cognitive perspective of the other.
Yeah.
And you know, classroom teachers do that all the time. They do it naturally, they do it brilliantly. But in Roots of Empathy, we reinforce what they're already doing, and we do it through the lens of a baby. What is the perspective of this baby, what the baby is trying to do, how frustrating is that they can't do it.
Yeah.
But also the affective side of empathy is required for real solid problem solving at the global stage, at the sandbox stage, at every stage in life. If we can bring together the affective and cognitive aspects of empathy, there's your peace pill.
Yeah, well, there you go, because the whole topic of this special series of Law and Justice is about how to talk policy and influence people. And there is an absence really of empathy at the political level in many countries, or it can be diminished in terms of importance to the economy, you know, or other matters. But really, isn't empathy and attachment crucial to actually public health, you know, and to our ability to flourish and have safe, you know, social societies where we care about one another and are curious about, when we do behave in kind of inappropriate, aggressive ways, that we go, why, you know, instead of just saying that the child or the adult is, you know, bad or disordered somehow, that we are actually, you guys are fostering curiosity at the very basic level in children and kind of spotting it, also maybe tuning into each other's bodies more, because we can actually spot someone's anger in their physique or depression in their physique as well, you know, if they're slumped into one another. But Mary, in terms of then the neuroscience, because I know from the website that aside from Dr. Bruce Perry, there are other well-known figures in the field like Dr. Dan Siegel, who are fans of the Roots of Empathy approach. Why do you think it is? I mean, what is it about the program that they see as you know, having some kind of real neurobiological importance?
Well, I think Dr. Perry and Dr. Siegel were so generously enamored with the program was because it actually put on the ground the neuroscience that they had been espousing for some long time. They're both leaders in the field. And particularly Bruce Perry, who has worked with terrible atrocities that were done to children. And both of them understand that the attachment relationship is core, and that empathy is at the base of a lot of, or the absence of it, a lot of the terrible things we do. But what they saw that we did, this whole brain-based understanding of empathy, that empathy is about two brains connecting, and that all learning is related to the brain. All loving is related to the brain. That in Roots of Empathy, we build relational richness. Bruce Perry speaks about relational poverty. He sees, when he's come to the classrooms, he sees how the children are learning to understand themselves first, to have self-empathy, and then to understand the other, that their heart's open and their mind's open. And, you know, in the little babies, we say their bodies are a theater of emotion. Nice. Because when you think of their brains, the Centers for Feeling and the Centers for Thinking are inextricably linked. So that, as Bruce says, the babies in this early attachment relationship learn to love or to hate by the way they are treated. And it's not, my reason for starting Roots of Empathy in a word is that birth should not be destiny. It ain't fair. Yeah. So I'm raging for justice for all those little children through no fault of their own, and those parents who are generationally transmitting what they experience. So there's nobody to blame here, but there's a lot of people to shame. Yeah. And the shaming needs to be that you have articulated what you know is required for civil society. And that's what we say. We want to build a more caring, peaceful, and civil society by raising levels of empathy in children and adults. And we can do that. We don't need any research. You mentioned early adversity. Yeah. Well, the ACEs study has really expanded our understanding in the world that people's behavior is related to their experiences. Their experiences are lodged in their brains and bodies. It's not to blame them. It's for us to understand how can we unpack that? How can we give them different experiences like Roots of Empathy that will make different connections in their brains so that they can retool how they think and feel, that they can reshape their future. They can help others because they can make friends. And I think this whole idea of who we should shame, I mean, that's a ridiculous thing, I guess, to say. I wouldn't shame anybody, but shame on us as a society that we know all these things and we haven't made the appropriate policy changes. And I mean, I see gorgeous things happening in the Republic, in Northern Ireland, throughout Europe, and most of the places we work in the world. We've been talking, I first met Vince Felitti, who started this whole study, which resulted in our understanding of the lifelong physical, emotional, and cognitive impact of early adversity. So for 10 years, I've been talking about to teachers and to our own people that when children behave badly, we should never say, "What is the matter with you?" We should always say, "What has happened to you?" Yeah. Because it's their history that's doing this. So I think the ability to build understanding, connection, and love in the world is in our hands. And I just feel that, I mean, in Ireland, you're doing a lot of Roots of Empathy. It's been 10 years that we've been there.
Where is it, Mary, in Ireland? I hadn't been aware that it was there until I looked up. Is it in a few different parts of the country?
I can tell you it's all across Ireland. Yeah. I mean, it's right up in Donegal. It's in Cork where you are. It's pretty well spread over. There's a lot of it in Galway. I was in Galway recently. Nice. And I was so thrilled to see how much of Roots of Empathy they are. And in the Republic of Ireland, we work through Bernardo's.
Okay, super.
They do the partnership is there. They do the heavy lifting and connecting the schools and everything.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah. We go with local wisdom where we can.
Yeah. Well, they're very interested in I suppose supporting healthy attachment and supporting the carers, because as a mom, I know that you're vulnerable. It can be very tough being a parent, and particularly, as you say, if you've had maybe traumatic parenting experiences yourself, then you need more buffers, you need more support, and Bernardo's do tremendous work. But so Roots of Empathy, as you say, it is global. It started in Canada, it's gone worldwide, and it's in Ireland. And why do you think it's proven so popular in all these other countries?
Yeah. Well, I feel a bit guilty because we turn down, I say 2 to 1, more than 2 to 1, the invitations. Okay. I think we all ache for peace in the world, and I think we all ache for connection. And people are gradually coming to the idea, if we start with the children, we can build a civil society. Mm-hmm. And the thing about Roots of Empathy is it celebrates the children, it celebrates a parent from the community, It celebrates the volunteer from the community that we train. It doesn't just come to a classroom, it comes to a community.
Mm-hmm.
So that there's a lot of volunteers involved here. And we know that when you impact the thinking and the learning and the feeling of young children, there is a long-term impact. In fact, some of our studies are, they're randomized longitudinal, so they follow the children out. And the longest we've got, unfortunately, is followed the children 3 years after they've had the program. Well, the impact is still there, that these children are still less aggressive, they bully less, they're less violent than the other children. And actually, when the comparison groups in every country where this has been done, there's an increase in the aggression, bullying, and violence in the comparison groups, and a steady decrease in the roots of empathy. And the same thing with social emotional competence or pro-social behavior. It goes up and it stays up and sometimes even goes up higher. So it's a brilliant investment. Children are always the best investment you can make. And you know, James Heckman, who won the Nobel Prize for his study on the economic, he's an economist, the economic viability of investing in young children. Now, he was speaking about even younger, the seeds of empathy age. We work with 3 to 5 year olds and seeds of empathy. So we know the payoff is there. Why on earth we don't do more things like roots of empathy that are proven to impact children's well-being, their mental health and happiness, which are all gateways to learning. And actually poor mental health and poor well-being are gateways to poor outcomes. So, you know, we've got the ACEs study, we've got all these things. So when I said shame on us, and shame is, I think, a throwback to my generational, it's a horrible word.
Yeah, we've done much of it in Ireland historically as well. You know, it hasn't done too much good, but I know what you mean. Why haven't we acted on it?
Well, right. Why don't we put it all together? We don't need more studies.
Yeah.
You know, we keep doing research in Roots of Empathy. Why? Because everybody thinks their children are different.
Right.
Now, I have to say, in Ireland, we didn't need to do more studies. Fergus Finlay, who was the head of Bernardo's, when I went there 10 years ago, I said, now, Fergus, there's all kinds of universities are dying to do studies. He says, are you kidding me? Look at the studies you have. We're not spending 5 cents on another randomized study, which costs a lot of money and just goes to prove what's already been proven.
It's a fair point.
But you know what I do? Everywhere we go. And I mean, I don't think there's any other program I know of who does this. We ask the children to evaluate their experience over the year with Roots of Empathy. We ask the classroom teacher, you know what? Teachers know what's going on better than anybody else. Not only do they know their own students, they know class after class after class of students. So they have the goods, the teachers. We ask them to evaluate what they saw happening over the year. We ask the volunteer parent of the baby to evaluate their experience, and we ask the volunteer instructor to evaluate their experience. And then thank you, SurveyMonkey. It's all put in the hopper, and the open-ended questions, along with all the graphs showing how many teachers thought this and etc., are put out every single year in every single classroom in every single country, because we owe that. If we're in your classrooms, you got to know what's happening. So we send that out in a report.
Yeah, well, I can imagine how all the participants would like to also give their feedback, you know, particularly if they found it valuable, but even if they didn't, you know, if on the rare occasion that might happen, because again, my daughter Aurora and my son Luke would love to give their opinion on something. Again, it's about, you know, from the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, honoring the voice and experiences of the child as well, and their participation, and capturing that as very valuable data, I think. But in terms then of when you do grant a request, say from an interested school or an interested country, is the program implemented exactly the same way everywhere? You know, is there fidelity to the model? Is that required by Roots of Empathy?
I have to confess, I'm the original control freak.
Okay.
So when, so we wouldn't be here for 24 years
Well,
unless
there you
there
go.
was
Yeah.
a real respect, not just for integrity, but implementation
Mm-hmm.
integrity. So we are super responsive to cultural nuances.
Mm.
I can tell you one thing, the program is the program, but in Indigenous communities in Canada, we might introduce the heartbeat and the drum.
Okay.
What the children, because we have to translate all of our, for all of our different countries, we translate what is taught, the curriculum, but also what we change is, for example, Korea is our most recent country. And we use a lot of children's literature in the visit before the baby comes and the visit after. And we have to have, for fidelity purposes, the same discussions happening in classrooms all over the world. But we have to use literature that speaks to the children. So we spend massive amounts of time finding the book that will allow the discussion so that the children, you know, in Costa Rica, in Curitiba, will have the same conversation as they will be having in Canada. So we are culturally sensitive. In Ireland, we are in some of your Irish schools, and the program takes place in Irish.
Okay.
We sing all the Irish songs. We give children examples. You know, we
I'm
teach
impressed.
them the Irish
That's
songs.
some work, all right. Yeah.
It's gorgeous. You should see here some of it. We're going to Mexico shortly. So we're in the process of collecting from Mexico what are all, we have to have bouncing rhymes for the baby. We have to have tickling rhymes that we teach the children. We have to have a lullaby, and we have to have a chanting song.
Okay.
So all of these things are in every culture, and they're all completely unique, but they're having such fun with this. They're competing. The people with whom we're working we're going to a convent school in Mexico that has 900 children in the first year.
My goodness.
Yeah, so they have great internal competitions about which songs we put in the curriculum. But to answer your question, there is huge cultural fidelity, but massive implementation integrity in that every child in any desk in a Roots of Empathy classroom has a similar experience in their own language and their own culture.
Okay. And I suppose from what I know of the importance of fidelity generally, it's important because otherwise if you're too flexible with the model, then the model doesn't really exist anymore. It's pulled to pieces, or you can't be as confident in the findings that you have that it's really the model that's making the difference for people. Isn't that correct?
Well, I can't confirm that you know, richly enough.
Yeah.
Because here's how we do it. We have the same training. It's in different languages all over the world. We have certification of our instructors. They have to be recertified every year, so they have professional development. But the biggest thing that supports our wonderful volunteer instructors is that they have their own personal mentor who visits them in the classroom, who builds a personal profile for their learning. So when you become a empathy instructor, you may be volunteering, but we are volunteering our time to the commitment to make this a really deep learning experience. Our instructors stay with us for many, many years because they're learning all the time. And, you know, we have a profile for each instructor. And that sort of, you know, the combination in terms of fidelity, if you've got a training, if you've got a certification, if you've got a curriculum, if you've got mentoring, if you've got professional development, if you've got research, and if you've got evaluations like the surveys we do, that's the gold standard. And they keep telling us all over the world, you've got the gold standard, that's why we want you. So, but we won't grow faster than we can guarantee that implementation integrity. So that's why we're not literally everywhere.
Yeah, fair.
We can't do it.
Yeah,
we can only do what we can do.
Standards. I get that. Particularly as a researcher, I know that the brand has value, and you can't have it watered down by enthusiastic, but maybe less rigorous practice. And where though do people train? Is it online training, or do you come to the countries, or do they go to you, or how does that work, Mary?
Well, we go to the country. It's a lot cheaper for the country, and we learn.
Right.
So before we start with the country, we learn, and there's two models. One is the model you've got in the Republic of Ireland, where we partner with an organization on the ground that we respect, that has shared purpose. And the other one is we set up our own not-for-profit and hire staff and work in the country that way. The training is a 4-day training.
Okay.
It's always experiential. We come to the country and we learn a whole lot. We make friends and build the relationships. And then initially we bring mentors to that country, but then we train local mentors. I mean, you got 9 local mentors in Ireland right at this minute. And then we train local trainers. But we do have a virtual training institute, which is for professional development. We've got a whole barrage of videos which help people get deep knowledge. People can call in and join some of our online learning discussions. They don't replace training, they enrich it. It's professional development. But I have to tell you, in this pandemic, we've had to reinvent ourselves.
Of course.
You know, the most remarkable thing about Roots of Empathy that we hear all the time is that it's experiential. And this is what Bruce Perry and Dan Siegel love, because it's a real heartfelt experience. And when you combine emotion and cognition, you have deep learning.
Yes.
And deep learning doesn't leave you, it changes you. So in this pandemic, because the children need Roots of Empathy more than ever when they go back to school, we have created a recovery program for classrooms, depending on how children are going back to school. And I mean, in all of our countries, you've got every
we don't know yet.
Well, the only one that's completely normal at the minute that we're going back to is New Zealand.
Okay. Yeah.
But the children are going back. So we're waiting, we're in touch with everybody to see how to do it. But as a stopgap measure, we have created an online recovery program where children will have many opportunities. Is it online? You know, they'll say, this is the baby who will be coming to your classroom whenever it's safe for the baby to come. We'll have videos, we'll have pictures, but we'll deliver the program.
Yeah.
Children will have a chance to talk about how they feel, because I can promise you, the children are not okay.
No.
Families are not okay. Some survive better than others, but it's been so dysregulating.
For all of us.
Everybody.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we have that. And then in the new year, for this part of the hemisphere, the baby will have the debut and things will be as normal. We hope. But I'm making it up, because all I'm doing is guessing based on informed guesses. And every day starts with every country. Okay, what's happening? What was the new rate? So it looks good for us in Korea. It looks good for us in New Zealand. And it actually looks good in the Netherlands.
Right.
But, you know, some of the places that were ready to go back, they've had an outbreak and they've had to close down again. So the whole point of Roots of Empathy being the most successful experiential program anywhere in education suddenly might go online.
Yes,
so,
I know. And it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. You know, it's better than denying the kids the benefit of the experience. And again, the learning, the talking and expressing their own emotions with the baby and in connection with others. But Mary, I was talking to Jim Sporlader recently, who was involved in the Paper Tigers documentary, and he was saying that he's very concerned, like you are, about COVID-19 and the impact that it's having on all children and families. And that so the kids who were experiencing great trauma and adversity previously are stuck in these inescapable conditions with no healthy relational buffers, probably because they're stuck at home. But even kids who were doing pretty well before in fairly stable families might have you know, now they might be dealing with job loss, and we're all dealing with extra stress and strain and dysregulation, so that social and emotional learning will be more important than ever for all children. would you agree with that? That when we can get back to the real life classroom, that the core curriculum, you know, the focusing on the prefrontal cortex and cognition needs to be parked slightly until we can help kids feel safe and emotionally supported and not so fraught with danger and germs the whole time.
I completely support what you're saying. And, you know, I'm an old school mom and I work with schools all over the world. I completely appreciate they see their mandate to make up for the academic loss. But, you know, the people who come to the classrooms aren't just students, they're children. And as children, and all of us, we are not able to take advantage of instruction until we've done the internal construction, until we feel safe, until we feel connected, until we feel like ourselves again. So a whole lot of work needs to happen. And teachers, I would love to see them get the permission to do that, so that the first thing they say is, so what do you remember about your timetables? The first thing say, so great to see you and to be together again. And how are you feeling?
Yeah.
Because teachers have this amazing power. Yes, they're responsible for so much, and I really feel sorry for the pressure that teachers have. But guess what? They've suffered too.
Yeah.
So you can heal together if you've got emotional clarity.
Aside from the pandemic, we're living through a very fraught but interesting moment with the Black Lives Matters protests globally. And obviously that started with yet another police homicide, the murder of George Floyd, and other ones. There have been many killings since and many before, unfortunately. But all around the world now, people have come out of lockdown to take to the streets. Many, many white people who never really thought about these issues, I suspect, are kind of going, this is horrific and needs to stop. Do you think that empathy, or the lack thereof, is at the core of racism and kind of the deliberate policies of kind of cultural obliteration across the world, you know, linked to imperialism? In Canada, you've an imperialist history. Ireland has been a colony. Many places have. And I watched Anthony Bourdain's show in Sri Lanka last night, where, you know, the Tamil Tigers had an uprising for many 30 years or so. So it's not unique to America, but is empathy, I suppose, the key to growing beyond this, to see the common humanity and the need for equity and equality and the need for the ability not to just survive in the world, you know, to grapple for the most menial jobs or whatever and rubbishy housing, but to actually have one's rightful place at the decision-making table and that type of thing, Mary?
Well, yes, you articulated that so beautifully. The absence of empathy underscores all of the isms, racism, whatever is cruel in this world. But I also believe that empathy is the answer, and in growing number of newspaper headlines and in blogs, you will hear that. You will hear that from the corporate world, you will hear that from governments. You know, if you look back and to the Holocaust, which was the world's most extreme example, basically, of racism against the Jews, the Nuremberg trials said that the Holocaust was the world's greatest example of the absence of empathy.
Okay.
That denial of the humanity of a whole sect of society, that we enabled ourselves to say they are different, and because they're different, we are better. So whether it's sexism or ageism, whatever the difference is, racism, if we allow the difference to hive us off and we fail to see the strand of our connection is our ability to feel. That's what makes us human. And little children understand that what makes us human is the ability to feel. And what makes us connect and be able to have friends is that empathy. And without the ability to feel and emotional literacy, you can't have full-scale empathy. And we are an emotionally illiterate society. We have homework to do in society. We need to develop that affective part of empathy, because cognitive empathy, where you can take the perspective of another, will make you a great sociopath, possibly, a wonderful used car salesman. But without affective empathy, the ability to not only understand how another person feels and to be literate with your own feelings, but to be able to feel with, that's the thing. So we can do that, but if we don't start generationally enabling children to have that, you know, it's like, that's the public health approach, but we also have to have the medical approach, which is do something now.
Yes.
So I'm saying, for God's sake, act, but also prevent. And prevention for all of those cruelties and inhumanities, we need to develop empathy. And, you know, whether it's the Middle East or wherever the long-term turmoil is, and, you know, we don't go to countries that don't have democracies.
Right, okay.
So where do you
that is a whole market, obviously, that could badly need some empathy. But obviously, Roots of Empathy works with school children, and the Seeds of Empathy with smaller kindergartners. How do we, for the adults who are not now predisposed to have empathy, you know, the women and men who are hollering abuse at people because of their skin color or their sexuality or their cultural identity or whatever thing it is about them, the aspect about them that is offensive to people lacking in empathy?
I think the people like you, I think the people like you, and there's tons of people like you who see this injustice, we need to have the moral courage that little children have. In Roots of Empathy, we tell children, when things are unfair, call it. May not be your fault, but basically you're complicit. If you don't do anything, it is your fault.
Yes.
So if you see something and it's not fair, say so. So children do that, and they do amazing things.
As well, the fact that we have video evidence, as if that was what was necessary to believe what people have been saying for a very, very long time. There's kind of no denying it. And so the calls like you've made there, that it's not enough to just not be racist yourself, but you've got to, when you see it, say, no, this is not okay. Another thing that I think is really important, and some countries with the colonial history have done it. You guys do it in Canada, where, you know, you acknowledge the lands of Indigenous people every time. Whereas we have a history with our own traveling community that is racist and discriminatory, and there's never been a state apology. You know, do you think from a policy level, I'm not expecting you necessarily to comment on Ireland's situation now, but things like that, the state saying we did wrong by a group of people, we're sorry for that and we'll make amends, is that important in demonstrating empathy and in healing wounds, do you think?
Well, I think you make such a good point, because there are varying levels of leadership that influence us. So if you look at political leadership, if you look at the people that we have elected in all countries in the world, they have authority. They have authority we've given them. So we need to hold them accountable. And the thing is, they will do whatever we ask them to do. So if we, I mean, you get who you deserve. So if it's an important thing, we need to speak to our representatives and say, when are you guys going to get your act together and make an apology? And it doesn't matter what country or what you're apologizing for. We may not be accountable for the sins of our ancestors, but look at the statues being torn down.
Yes.
That people are feeling responsible for the sins of their... I think all we need to do in life is to acknowledge history, not to blame ourselves, but to build a highway that allows us to build an equitable world. And I do think that the world we are going to deliver to our children, because of this amazing time in our history where we are standing up for Black lives, given the atrocities, the Black lives also represent your travelers, and we all have in Canada, we have our Indigenous people who we swooped out of the children out of their families and did dreadful things to them. We have an opportunity because of this light that has been shone on our behavior. So whether it's at the political level, whether the religious organizations take a role, because any community of influence that we are connected to, whether it's our workplace, a place of worship, they have a power of pulpit. And whether it's a bully pulpit, or whether it's a formal pulpit, or whether it's any kind of a stand. If you're a rap singer, we're hearing wonderful things that rap singers are doing, you know. Children are writing poems. Everybody has the chance to contribute. And the definition for me of a citizen is someone who has voice. You mentioned voice. We really work on voice in Roots of Empathy. They have voice and they have the opportunity to contribute. So we have to set the table so that everybody can come to it, whether they're in a high chair, a wheelchair, or a rocking chair. Everybody needs to be at a table where their voice can be heard, not just to voice our rage, but to voice our hope. What are we going to do? Everybody can do something. So protest, I think, is valuable. That will wane. And what after that? You know, so I think, you know, we all have to do something, whether it's giving Silly Willy a sandwich and saying, how are you today? Or acknowledging the shame of the homeless people that I pass in my day. How is that possible that we've got libraries full of books and we've got people sleeping on the streets?
Yeah.
You know, I love libraries. I have nothing against libraries, but what are our values?
What are our values?
Yeah, because our values are absolutely demonstrated in what we invest in. So what are our policies? And, you know, in your country, I just want to say the teachers are more affectionate and supportive of the children than in many countries I visited.
That's lovely to know. Yeah.
They really are. When the teachers talk about the children, they talk with warmth, and in one case, even with tears.
Yes.
Because there's I think because of your culture, maybe. So teachers are not preachers, they're reachers.
Yeah.
But their voice in regular conversations with the children, with their colleagues, in their communities, but don't underestimate the power of the kitchen table.
Yes.
The conversations we have in our families have more impact on us ourselves, because sometimes we don't know what we think till we say it. And sometimes we're horrified and we want to pull it back in and apologize for it, but that's okay. But the power, you say, what can we do? We can do a whole lot because we are who we are. So the conversations we have in the family that allow our children to hear us talk about this Black Lives Matter. And we have a responsibility to talk about racism, just so our children will know it's a real thing. And our children will know how we feel, that anything that's not fair should be called. And racism simply is not fair. We don't need to go into historical roots of racism. It's just that there are people, travelers or Black people, who are not being treated fairly. In our family, we like to treat people fairly. We believe in that. So it just gives your child, if you're talking about the home as the heart, an experience to know that when they might find themselves in a situation of anti-phobic, you know, any kind of cruelty or exclusion or ism, that they have the courage to say, well, that's not fair. What you said is not nice. And we tend not to do that. And I really think this Black Lives Matters is addressing it. And I did some videos on our website to help parents. I don't think the racist one is up yet, but to help parents during their this lockdown period and this very big reflective and lonely period, to think about how their children are doing during this time, how their mental health is, and how the relationship of the parent-child is. And given it's the most powerful tool you have to build tomorrow, is your relationship with your child. So I just think this is a remarkable time. I'm very lucky to be alive now.
Yeah,
You know, my kids used to say, "Oh, Mom, you got to grow up in the 60s."
yeah, yeah.
You know? But I think I'm very glad my kids and my little tiny grandkids are here in the world to witness this candle lit for all of us to be a better people and to create a better world.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It has the potential to be very special, actually, and for us to just recalibrate what we want for our countries and our children and for ourselves, you know. And an unfair, unequal, racist, sexist, transphobic world is not a fair, empathic one to live in. So, Mary Gordon, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. You're a legend, and thank you for the tremendous work that you and your team do in Canada and around the world. It's really remarkably special and visionary, and I hope some of the policymakers or influencers who might tune into this in Ireland or abroad will listen to some of your messages. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, Jane, I'm really grateful. I enjoyed very much speaking with you, but I'm really grateful that you're talking about these things at this time, and I'm happy to be part of it, and all the best to you.
Thanks so much. This was How to Talk Policy and Influence People, a special series of Law and Justice. Bye-bye now. Thank you, Mary.
Bye.